Hi, I'm David Hooks. Welcome to NEWSWATCH Scotland. Do you know what doorstepping is? It's a journalistic term. It means forcing an interview on someone without their prior consent. Or, to put it another way, confronting them. Remember when the Michelle Thompson story broke? BBC Scotland wasted no time in confronting Nicola Sturgeon.
Michelle Thompson maintains that all of her business dealings were entirely within the law. She's herself, as I understand it, not under investigation by the police.
What do you think of Michelle Thompson's business practices? What do you think of her business practices?
The SNP leader was in fact confronted on more than one occasion.
Do you regret endorsing Michelle Thompson?
And what about the time the Daily Telegraph falsely claimed Nicola Sturgeon wanted David Cameron to win the 2015 general election?
Let's bring you some breaking news now. The Scottish First Minister Nicola Sturgeon giving her reaction to the reports in the Daily Telegraph which suggested she'd prefer David Cameron as Prime Minister to Ed Miliband.
The SNP leader was confronted in Glasgow that very day.
Did you, at any stage, say that you would prefer David Cameron as Prime Minister to Ed Miliband?
Absolutely, 100% categorically, no, I did not.
Now that interviewer was at times pretty tetchy and highly suggestive.
You've spent 5 years saying that Scotland should be independent because of the Tories. Is there not a certain attraction for you in continuing to campaign on that basis after the election?
OK, just for the record, let me make clear that you're asking me to comment on comments where you won't tell me who sent these comments, but I'm expected to somehow, believe that those comments have been made.
It's worth pointing out that the accusations against both Michelle Thompson and Nicola Sturgeon were ultimately proven to be baseless. Baseless smears, though, were enough for BBC Scotland to dispatch senior reporters to confront and question the SNP leader on camera. But BBC Scotland appears to operate different rules depending on which political leader is at the centre of a controversy.
I fully accept that what they said was wrong, that it was wrong, and if their behaviour doesn't change, they are out. But we've got to allow people the opportunity online to change, and even if that's one person or two people at a time, then that's the way we're going to go about it.
That was Ruth Davidson, commenting on two councillors who had just been reinstated into the Conservative Party. You'll notice that unlike Nicola Sturgeon, Ruth faced no questions. That's odd when you consider what kind of people Ruth had just reinstated. Scottish Tory councillor Alistair Majory had posted anti-Catholic and sexually explicit messages on social media. Scottish Tory councillor Robert Davies had posted racist messages on social media. So here we have two elected officials who are known to hold racist and or bigoted views. And racism and bigotry are at the extreme end of what most people would consider highly inappropriate behaviour. Yet Ruth Davidson is allowed to make a statement to camera without facing one single question from the BBC.
What they said was wrong, that it was wrong, and if their behaviour doesn't change, they are out.
The refusal to post a question to the leader of the Scottish Conservatives on camera is even more bizarre when you consider Ruth Davidson had refused to give interviews on the subject of the two councillors for days. So frustrated was one BBC Scotland presenter that he resorted to posting a message on social media himself. So why, when a high-profile BBC presenter was complaining about Ruth Davidson repeatedly refusing to be interviewed, was a BBC Scotland camera dispatched to just film her, without apparently having prepared one solitary question? The reporter who introduced the Reporting Scotland item was Nick Eardley. You'd think that Eardley was part of the team that filmed Ruth Davidson, wouldn't you? But you'd be wrong. Here's how Nick Eardley responded on social media when quizzed about the Reporting Scotland item. That's a BBC Scotland reporter accusing someone of engaging in a conspiracy theory for asking a question. According to Eardley, he wasn't present when Ruth Davidson was filmed, so who arranged and conducted the filming, and why did Eardley present the item on Reporting Scotland? When BBC critic G.A. Ponsonby asked this very question, he received the following reply from Eardley. In her statement, Davidson claims both councillors have apologised and are currently receiving diversity training. Davidson doesn't have the appearance of someone who's suddenly been confronted by a film crew. There's little sign of discomfort, it's all very neat and tidy. However, shortly after the interview, the charity cited by Ruth Davidson calls her version of events into question.
When this story emerged, we offered to work with the elected members concerned to help them understand why their tweets caused such controversy and upset. a Conservative Party spokesperson indicated that the member involved would take part in such a meeting. Sadly, we have heard nothing from either the councillor or the party.
So Ruth Davidson's statement was never challenged by anyone at the BBC. Why was she not subjected to the same aggressive and probing style of questioning Nicola Sturgeon routinely endures? It's almost as though BBC Scotland didn't want to damage the image of Ruth Davidson they had helped to cultivate.
The Scottish Conservative leader attends Cabinet at Downing Street and says the government's position on Brexit must change.
The Scottish Tory leader wields more power than ever at Westminster. Her group of 13 MPs a glimpse of light for the Tories in a bleak election. They promised to fight Scotland's corner.
BBC Scotland reporters have repeatedly praised Ruth Davidson since the general election. According to some, Ruth Davidson won the general election in Scotland.
Right now, the Scottish Tory group at Westminster, the new group, they feel a bit like Team Ruth, because they fought a different campaign in Scotland on different issues, and they had a different outcome. Clue, they won.
Others have heaped gushing praise on the Scottish Tory leader.
We might be seeing more of this from Ruth Davidson. She is very much an invigorated leader, of course, after her success at the general election. The Tories are saying she's very much her own woman, so maybe watch this space.
There is no doubt that Ruth Davidson wasn't pursued on the issue of the two councillors to any great extent. She reinstated into her party one councillor who holds racist views and one who holds sectarian views. But they aren't the only Scottish Conservatives to hold objectionable views and to have posted them on social media. On September 1st, 11 days after the councillors were reinstated, Ruth Davidson appeared on Radio Scotland's flagship morning radio programme, Good Morning Scotland. The Scottish Conservative leader wasn't there to answer questions on any of her councillors. She was there to talk about a new policy her party was promoting. Halfway through the interview though, presenter Gary Robertson went off script and pressed her on the issue of the two councillors.
Who did your two councillors apologise to?
Well, they have apologised. They've apologised to anybody that was offended by the comments that they made. They've also gone for diversity training because I want to change their behaviour. And on top of that, that's training that the party is paying for, supplying to them, making sure and looking over the shoulder to ensure that it's completed in the way. They've indicated that they want to change their behaviour. And on top of it, it's happening as we speak. And on top of that, they're in talks with an anti-Semitic charity called Show Racism the Red Card.
Davidson struggled badly when pressed on the issue of racism and bigotry. We can only wonder how she would have coped had she been confronted with similar tough questions on primetime TV. And the scandals involving Scottish Tory councillors have kept coming. Since the Good Morning Scotland interview, two more have hit the headlines. On September 22nd, Kathleen Leslie was struck off the teaching registry for posting abusive messages targeting Nicola Sturgeon. On the same day, Tory councillor Michael Jamieson was charged over child abuse images. Now, interestingly, unlike STV, when BBC Scotland published the child abuse story, the word Tory was missing from the headline. Does the BBC always hide the party name in such headlines? Ruth Davidson appeared on Reporting Scotland that evening, but as you see, faced no questions on the continuing scandals involving her party.
We're the only country in the world that at the point at which we leave are already going to comply with every rule and regulation that the EU has. So we're not a Canada, we're not a Norway, and we're looking for something different. We're looking for a UK model.
Days after being charged over child abuse images, Michael Jamieson resigned as a councillor, and a by-election will now take place. We'd love to show you how BBC Scotland reported the resignation. Alas, we can't, because they didn't report it. Throughout all of this, Ruth Davidson has faced not one single question on camera from BBC Scotland. Not one. On Friday, September 29th, the councillor who had posted the racist tweets resigned from the party after refusing to apologise. This was one of the councillors Ruth Davidson 4 weeks earlier insisted had already apologised. And the resignation featured all but briefly on Reporting Scotland.
A Stirling councillor who was reinstated by the Conservatives after being suspended over his offensive tweets has left the party.
Ruth Davidson was nowhere to be seen in the item. She did, though, turn up on the same programme the next day.
The Scottish Conservative leader Ruth Davidson has called for serious people to carry out the legwork of Brexit negotiations. She made the comments as the party gears up for its UK conference in Manchester.
Ruth Davidson has escaped scrutiny on a range of issues since her party won 13 seats in the snap general election. BBC Scotland, though, has shown a quite staggering level of indifference towards the Scottish Tory leader. Despite scandals involving child porn, racism, sectarianism and a string of other distasteful issues, Ruth hasn't been confronted once on camera. Ruth made an appearance on the Sunday Politics show on October 1st. The programme broadcast a trailer which included the following segment.
May's local elections saw the first shoots of a Scottish Tory revival, but within days, two of the party's newly elected councillors were suspended for posting racist and sectarian tweets. Ruth Davidson's been a vocal opponent of online abuse, so when she later allowed her councillors back into the party, there were cries of hypocrisy.
Were you following me around the street? Are you asking me a question or asking me a question?
Yeah, asking the same question.
Journalists found the Scottish Tory leader unusually difficult to get a hold of on that occasion.
Now, amazingly, in the interview that followed, Ruth Davidson didn't field one question about any of the aforementioned Scottish Tory councillors. You could be forgiven for thinking Ruth was being deliberately protected. But why?
After leading her troops out of the political wilderness, Ruth Davidson now finds herself second favourite among party members to succeed the Prime Minister Theresa May. Second, that is, to the Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson.
It doesn't end there. On Saturday, October 7th, the weekend of the SNP conference, guess who dominated BBC News North and South of the border?
Hello, good evening. The leader of the Scottish Conservatives has told the UK party to get its house in order and back the Prime Minister Theresa May.
The bulletin was based on comments Davidson had given in a Radio 4 interview with BBC presenter Nick Robertson. That's correct. On the weekend of the SNP conference, the BBC's former political editor invited the leader of the Scottish Conservatives onto his programme. And that was less than a week after Davidson's own party conference where she'd enjoyed similar headlines. Incredibly, she appeared on the BBC again the very next day.
Now, at the Tory party conference, there was one irrepressible, ebullient figure with a boyish haircut patrolling the fringe and wowing the conference floor. I'm not talking about Boris Johnson, but one of his greatest admirers, Ruth Davidson, and she's with me now.
Ruth Davidson is being touted as a future UK Prime Minister. Her image is being carefully manipulated by a friendly and compliant media. The Scottish Conservative leader is being presented as someone ordinary people can trust, influential, popular, down-to-earth, politically savvy. Pursuing her over racist sectarian councillors might tarnish that carefully nurtured image, and that wouldn't help Ruth at all now, would it? Not convinced? Ask yourself a question. What if the councillors who hit the headlines over child porn, racism and bigotry had been from the SNP? No wonder Ruth Davidson is laughing. As ever, draw your own conclusion.